Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. A lot is happening here on the network, so let's get started right now. First up, we're going to be back live today in the retrial of Henry Segura. This is actually the second trial of Segura, who's been charged with the murder of his girlfriend, Brandy Peters, as well as his son and Peters' two daughters. The first jury back in 2017 ended up hung with an 8-4 split in favor of an acquittal. During opening statements last week, the prosecution explained that the defendant had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill Peters and the kids because he owed back child support payments. They detailed how he lied to police, he used a secret phone, and how the bathtub where the two kids were drowned had a mixture of DNA possibly matching Segura. The defense said, though, the murders were actually carried out by gang members as Peters was involved in the illicit drug trade, and she might have ripped them off to the tune of $100,000 worth of drugs. We also have to tell you about the Mollie Tibbetts hearing tomorrow. There is a big update in this case for the young woman out of Iowa who was killed back in July 2018. And this has been a very fascinating case to follow. And what's been happening here is tomorrow there is a suppression hearing to determine whether or not this man, Christian Rivera, statements that he made to police will actually be allowed in. His defense attorneys say that his confession was coerced, that he was not properly read his Miranda rights. So we are going to be back live there tomorrow, and his trial is set for February 4th, 2020. Right now, though, we want to focus on the Patrick Frazee case. Now, although we are not allowed to be live in that trial, we have been following it very closely. This man has been charged with the murder of his fiancée, Kelsey Berreth, who has been missing since back in Thanksgiving of 2018. And there's been a dramatic updates that have been happening in this courtroom, including having his girlfriend testify as the state's key witness. And although, again, we are not live, we do have somebody who has been following this trial closely, and we're going to break it down right now. Joining me is Jennifer Meckles, a reporter from 9 News Denver. Jennifer, great to have you here on Law and Crime.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so there's been some bombshells in the courtroom. Let's start off with Crystal Lee Kenny. What stood out to you as some of the bombshells that she dropped for this jury?
Crystal Lee's story was compelling even before we heard her testify. We know she is the girlfriend in a very long and complicated relationship with Patrick Frazee, one that goes back long before Kelsey Berreth, more than 10 years. And the prosecution hopes will speak to a history of manipulation by Patrick Frazee, something that they're trying to prove now in this case of Kelsey Berreth's murder. Crystal Lee took the stand last Wednesday and Thursday, and she has admitted to helping not only clean up the crime scene in this case, but also helping Patrick Frazee destroy the evidence. But what I think the prosecution was really trying to do is to explain to the jury why a woman who doesn't even live in Colorado, a woman who says she didn't even know of the existence of Kelsey Berreth about a year before this crime was allegedly committed, why would she even be a part of this? Why would she agree to this? So that's why her testimony began very much with describing a long and complicated relationship with her and Patrick that goes back 10 years, that includes dating on and off again, that includes a previous pregnancy between her and Patrick that was later terminated, that includes her having an affair with Patrick during the course of her marriage to somebody else, and then ultimately her agreeing to help Patrick with his plan to allegedly kill Kelsey Berreth. Listening to her in court was outstanding. She spoke for an entire afternoon, incredibly emotional testimony that started with describing this relationship and then ended with trying to explain to jurors how it came to be that she got involved in this case. And there were a lot of things that we knew ahead of time because she has taken a plea deal. She pled in February. She pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence in this case. But at the time of her plea, we only understood that she helped move the victim's phone in an attempt to kind of throw off investigators as they were trying to track down what happened. Much later, we learned there was a lot more involvement by Crystal Lee and her story and her connection to Patrick Frazee. So she spelled that all out for the jury, and the jury listened. They were captivated, as was everybody in the courtroom listening to this woman and how she is connected to this case.
What about some of the statements that she allegedly heard from the defendant? I mean, it was coupled also by, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the defendant's close friends, longtime pals, also testified about some statements that Frazee allegedly made. If you could expand upon that, because these are statements that, if true, the defendant probably never thought would come back to bite him.
Sure. Well, Crystal talked a lot about Patrick's desire to get rid Those were his words, get rid of this problem of Kelsey Berreth. And the witnesses that followed Crystal, it's clear the prosecution knows her story is quite wild, and now they're trying to bring in additional people who can corroborate her story, whether it be with evidence that they can show the jury or with additional people who had conversations with Patrick that back up what Crystal said happened. So we heard her say things like he was planning this, he wanted to get rid of her, he was finding all sorts of ways to try to do that, he was trying to get Crystal to help him do it. And then one of the witnesses that followed Crystal was a man who testified Friday afternoon that he was a longtime and close friend of Patrick Frazee's. Patrick Frazee is a rancher, he has cattle, he is a farrier for horses, he has a lot of property that he leases in the very rural mountains of Colorado. This is a friend who did a lot of that business with him and said we were very, very close. And Patrick mentioned to this man, although he thought he was joking, mentioned that he was looking for ways to kill Kelsey Berreth, the mother of his child. And this man, it was incredibly heartbreaking testimony last week. He was very upset that somebody he thought he was very close to could do something like this. But he said that that Patrick talked about killing Kelsey, that he made comments like no body, no crime. In this case, Kelsey Berreth's body has not been found. It's been looked for. They spent 50 days searching a landfill for it. We still haven't learned of any discovery of her remains at this point. This man testified that he was told by Patrick Frazee that Patrick was watching Kelsey, that he had people watching her, taking pictures of her and doing things around town. He said that Patrick was trying to prove that Kelsey was not a good mother to the little girl that they had together and that he wanted full custody of the baby. And this friend said that, when Patrick made these comments in the year before this happened, he always brushed him off. He thought it was a joke. He didn't think anybody was being serious, and it bothered him. He said he was uncomfortable with these statements by Patrick. He never thought it would lead to a murder trial.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I guess a lot of people didn't think that this was going to be the end result. But, with such a seemingly strong case against Frazee, any idea from what you've seen where the defense is going in this trial? Because after a bombshell first week, we are curious to see, well, what is the defense going to be?
We were really curious to see what their strategy would be, and I will tell you the two main things we heard from them in the opening arguments. Number one, that this is a case that sounds really good from the outside but has a shaky foundation. The defense actually used the analogy of a house that looks really nice from the outside. You want to buy it, the rooms look really good, but then when you go down and look deeper into the foundation of the home, it's really shaky, pointing out a lack of evidence in certain areas. There's no in the surveillance videos we do have that we see Patrick Frazee, they said you don't see blood. He allegedly killed her on Thanksgiving Day in daylight. How come nobody saw any of the movements and what he was doing? They also point to the credibility of this woman, Crystal Lee, this bombshell witness for the prosecution, and they're really trying to attack her credibility. Can we believe her? Before Crystal ever cooperated with authorities, she lied to police a long time, and it took a while for them to track her down. And the defense is really trying to make the jury understand that she was not initially a cooperative witness, and she got a pretty good plea deal. That could mean she gets no jail time out of this, potentially. And they just want to make sure that the jury questions the things that comes out of her mouth, because it is so important for the prosecution. Yeah. What we have not heard the defense say, though, is they have not turned this onto Crystal. We have not heard them blame Crystal. We've just heard them really go at her credibility.
Yeah, typical defense move, not surprising there. You go after the key witness. But the idea of looking at Frazee day in and day out, this is something that we don't have an opportunity to see. We just read about what's been happening. So have you been able to glean anything from his demeanor, how he's reacting during the course of this trial, perhaps when Kenny testified? Can you give us an inside perspective of what maybe he's looking like or his demeanor during the course of the trial? And maybe also more importantly, what is the jury's demeanor during the course of this as they're hearing these macabre details of what happened to this young woman?
Sure. I'll start, with the jury. I think the jury is overwhelmed by the amount of information they're getting. This is a rural community where a lot of people know each other. This was a highly covered case in their community. It was difficult during jury selection, I think, for them to find people who maybe weren't familiar with this case, but the jurors that have been seated, there was a lot to do about how much media consumption of the case they had. So many of these people throughout jury selection said they barely knew anything, if at all, about this case. And during opening statements, when the prosecution laid out their allegations, you could tell the jury was taking in a lot. It was a lot of information and a lot of very, to your point, macabre details that they're trying to now process. To see Patrick in court, I would say that almost every single person that's come through as a witness, Patrick is very engaged, stoic in the corner, paying attention, leaning in, listening to what they're saying. I did notice during testimony of Crystal, however, almost every time I looked up to see him, he was looking down. I'm not sure if he's writing notes or if it was difficult for him. We know very little about him, and we've not heard from him, of course. But that was the one witness I really noticed that he wasn't directly looking at the entire time.
Is there anybody in the courtroom there to support Frazee?
Yes, there are a few people. We've seen a family member or two, and his mother is, we're told, on the witness list, and so she can't be in the courtroom, but every single day she's sitting outside in the hallway. She has a book with her, and she's sitting there, and we've seen his sister sit in the courtroom, and we've seen a few other folks that just live in town that I'm not sure their connection to him, but just know him in various ways. And yeah, Kelsey Berreth, the victim in this case, has also had some loved ones in the courtroom as well.
Yeah, and court was dark yesterday. We are updating our audience about what's been happening as best as we can. What do you expect today and for the continuation of this trial for the week?
I think we're going to hear more witnesses who are designed to corroborate Crystal Lee's story. We started with that right after we finished with her testimony last week, and there's a lot more to go. I heard the judge mention late last week that we may have dozens of more witnesses to get through, and this was expected to be a 3-week trial. We also haven't heard a lot of testimony yet regarding phone evidence in this case, and phone evidence was very important in the beginning of tracking down the players. Phone evidence is how the investigators first learned about Crystal Lee and figured out who she was and her connection to this case. And we've heard a little bit in the phone world, but we haven't heard much to expand upon that. So I think we're going to hear more about that in the coming days.
Now, let me ask you the million-dollar question. I'm pretty sure the answer is going to be no, but have you heard anything to indicate if Patrick Frazee will testify and jump on that stand in his own defense?
I have not. And it'll be very interesting to see if he does. We certainly would love to hear from him, but I'm not sure, and I've heard no indication that it will or won't happen.
Typically, in these kinds of cases, we won't see it, but as you said, we just don't know a lot about him, and we've seen other trials before where sometimes the defendants want to jump on and give their side of the story about what happened or their interpretation of what happened. But I will say, Jennifer Meckles, thanks so much for coming on and breaking this down for us. We'd love to have you back as this trial continues on.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, everybody. So we are also waiting to jump live right now in the Henry Segura trial. I think I see a feed. I think we may be able to go in. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, hopefully we'll be live. Stay tuned.